here to warn other people and let them know that there's definitely something out there. And to this day, I still don't know what it was, nor have I ever gone into any woods or forest whatsoever. This happened while I was at a local summer camp, and there was absolutely nothing special about that day. No weird lights, weird people or animals, sounds, nothing. It was just the same camp schedule as I'd grown used to in the past 2 weeks that I'd been there. Now my age group had just finished lunch and we were able to persuade our counsellor to let us play a game called Scatter down by the lake. It's a giant hide and seek game that we play in the woods. We'd played this game at least 20 times before that day and nothing weird had happened to any of us. We all grew up playing in the woods, so it's not like we had an aversion or fear of it either. But for some reason that day, when our counsellor shouted scatter and I ran to find a hiding place, it became a whole new ball game. I'd run as far as I could while still being able to see the lake, as these were the rules of the game. I'd found a huge old uprooted tree that I decided would be the perfect hiding place, so I laid down as close as I could against the ground and waited. I'd been there for about 5 minutes when suddenly I heard a voice calling my name in a weird, dreamy-like voice, and not just any voice, my mum's. Now me and my mum are extremely close, thick as thieves, so I'd know her voice anywhere, and I would swear on my own grave that it was without a doubt hers. But I knew it couldn't be her, as she was 20 miles away at work. And even if it had actually been her and she'd come to pick me up early, the voice wasn't coming from the lake. It was coming from further out into the woods, beyond the border of the camp. I knew I should have run away from this strange mimic mum voice, but I couldn't. It was almost hypnotic. It messed with my thoughts and gave me doubts like, well, it could be mum. Or what if she's hurt and I have to get her? All these things were flooding into my mind like someone had broken a dam I didn't know was there, until they finally overwhelmed me and my emotions got the better of me, and I took off running in the direction the voice was coming from. I ran as far as I could with only this strange voice as my guide. I couldn't have run for more than 5 or 7 minutes when I got into a clearing and the voice suddenly stopped. When I entered the clearing and didn't hear my mum's voice calling me anymore, I could finally think clearly again and started to have little alarm bells go off inside my head saying, "You idiot," or "That's not mum," and "Run!" But I couldn't run. I didn't know where to run. I'd gotten so far away I had lost sight of the lake by the camp and had absolutely no idea where I was. And I was completely exhausted to boot. With no other options than to sit and catch my breath, I did just that. And no sooner had I sat down, more warning bells went off in my mind. I quickly did a 360 survey around the clearing and noticed a strange noise. It wasn't the continuation of the voice before. No, it was the distinct sound of chattering teeth, like if you were cold. Only there was no one else around, and it was the middle of June in North Carolina. There's no way someone could be cold. And that's when I heard it. Leaves and sticks crunch on the edge of the small clearing, and I realised something was watching me. And then whatever it was moved fast and in circles around the clearing, almost like it was circling prey. And it was at that moment I knew whatever it was had led me out there, away from the rest of my group. Without any other option other than to try and escape, I took off in the direction I thought I came from and sprinted as fast as I could, all while hearing the chittering of teeth and sticks crunching behind me. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't dare turn around to see what was chasing me. I knew that if I did, it would slow me down, and I absolutely was not about to do that. It felt like a lifetime of running away from this thing before I finally saw the lake. And even though I didn't think I could run faster than I ever had in my life, when I broke the tree line, I ran to the lake where I knew my friends were. At that point, I felt safe enough to stop and look back and see just what had been chasing me. But when I did, I only saw a fleeting form running back the way I had come and the distinct sound of chittering teeth. When I finally found my counsellor, who was the seeker trying to find us all, I was hysterical with fear and hugged her as tight as I could. When I finally calmed down, she tried to get me to tell her what happened, but I just asked, "Were you calling my name?" Before she even said anything, I already knew the answer. After all, it had been my mum's voice that had led me away from everyone else. But what she said next was so much more bone-chilling to me. She told me, "No one called for you. We didn't know you were gone. Everyone is still hiding. The game isn't over yet." I don't know if other drivers in different parts of the world have the same issues, but up here in northern Canada, there is a lot of really creepy and questionable stuff going on. I don't consider myself superstitious in any way, but some of the things I see I just can't explain. Before anyone calls me out and says that I'm the only one experiencing these things, I'm not. Other drivers and I regularly hit the bar after shifts, and some other drivers are really messed up over some of the stuff they've seen. I know a guy who keeps a lamp on inside his car at night because he's terrified of the dark after something happened to him that he won't tell any of us about. These things happen all the time. They're painfully real, and I cannot stress that enough. Several months ago, I want to say December, I was working a close shift, which is from 10 p.m. till 5 a.m. in the morning, and my delivery sector was mostly the outskirts of town, along the foothills and further north. Being December in Canada, there was about 6 inches of fresh snow, and only the highways were ploughed properly. Driving the rest of the roads would be a death wish if you didn't have the proper gear and experience. Lucky for me, I have an all-wheel drive car, studded tyres and chains in case things go really south. I'm also one of the more senior drivers. Being one of the few people with an all-wheel drive car, I was requested to take another delivery right to the edge of our delivery range, roughly 45 kilometres from the store. Since the weather was so bad, I called the number on my slip to confirm an address and that they still wanted the pizza. Getting an okay from what seemed like a cheery old lady, I set out down the highway, but not before stopping for my coffee, of course. Just after I left the city limits, I noticed something alarming. All of the lights, including the street lights, were out. Assuming a power outage due to a storm, I give my boss a call on his cell phone to confirm it. Confirming that it is indeed a sector-wide power outage, I attempt to give the lady I'm delivering to a call, trying to milk the apathy factor for extra tip. I try and be as nice as possible.
"Hello, this is your delivery driver. I'm noticing there's a power outage. I'm just wondering if you still wanted the pizza despite these terrible conditions."
The old lady responded back,
"Goodness, dearie, I didn't think you would still deliver it. What excellent service from you and your company. If you could make it out here, I will definitely make it worth your while. I've got a backup generator lighting my house, so I shouldn't be hard to miss. Please take your time due to these horrible conditions."
Knowing I'd hooked a substantial tip, I put my blinker on and continued back down the highway. One thing you guys need to understand was how dark it was. With it being later than midnight and not a single light on, the only thing illuminating my way were my subpar headlights. On top of that, it was snowing quite heavily. If my car were to die or my headlights were to go out, I'd be completely screwed. Lucky for me, neither of those things happened, but something worse did. About 10 k's down the road, what I can only assume was a dirt road underneath the mountains of snow in the middle of nowhere, I came across a car in the middle of the road with its hazards on. The car was diagonal across the road, and from its tracks, I could tell it tried to stop suddenly and lost control. Throwing my hazards on and getting on, I attempted to survey the scene. Moving about 20 metres from the car, I could not see any signs of life, and noticed that the driver's side door was swung open and snow was piling in the car. What alarmed me the most was what looked like blood on the inside of the window and all over the steering wheel. Upon clearing the snow from inside the car, it was obvious there was a pretty brutal accident here, as there was blood all over the driver's side. My mediocre first aid training kicking in, my first response was to call 911 and get an ambulance out here. Pulling out my cell phone, the most cliche thing happened to me. There was no freaking cell service. Obviously there's no freaking cell service, I screamed. I'm out here in the boonies. After having my little meltdown, I decided to see if I could see any tracks or something to lead me to this obviously injured person. At this point, I'd completely forgotten about the delivery and was pretty intent on helping whoever was messed up out here. The chance of another car coming by all the way out this late was slim to none, so this was on me. Using my delivery driver sleuthing skills, I managed to figure out a few things. 1. This person obviously hit something really, really, really big, like a moose or a large bear. The front of his car was almost entirely caved in, and both his wheels were going opposite directions. No way this thing was going anywhere. Drawing on past experience, I actually couldn't think of anything that would do as much damage to a car like that. 2. Seeing a small trail of blood leading up the road, I assumed he probably went walking to look for help. This was where I made my first mistake. I followed the trail of blood on foot. Wanting to play the hero, I bundled up and set out in the storm with a small LED flashlight that made decent light. At this point, I wasn't even thinking about my safety. I was concerned with whoever had injured themselves in that accident and getting them to safety. After about 5 minutes of walking, I realised that I had screwed up majorly as a singular thought came through my mind. What if whatever this driver hit was still out there? Judging by how big the impact on the car was, I can only guess that it was a grizzly bear or something unknown much larger. Dealing with a wounded animal in the middle of winter was not something my pay grade covered. After my moment of clarity, I decided my best bet was to get back to my car and get back to cell service to call 911. Not even after I'd taken 10 steps back towards my car, I heard what sounded like an entire tree being torn from the ground. The noise was absolutely deafening and threw me into a wild panic. I started sprinting back to my car but kept getting slowed down by the fact my legs could not coordinate with each other. After sprinting about 5 steps, I tripped hard and I fell face first into a snowbank. I just laid there, trying to get myself up and take a bearing. Just then, as I was about to get up, I heard something. I heard what sounded like heavy breathing coming from just out of visual range. To top it off, the noise was coming from towards the accident scene and my car. At this point, something felt terribly wrong. That laboured breathing sounded more animal than human and was far too loud for any human to make. I was terrified. I literally could not move out of that snowbank. After what seemed like an eternity, the breathing got louder and louder until suddenly I saw whatever was making that terrible noise. Whatever that thing was, it had to be standing a minimum 8 feet tall. It was running on 2 feet. But every couple of steps, it would stumble and start running like a bear on 4 legs. It had sort of a loping gait that reminded me almost exactly of a bear, but then it would get up on 2 feet and start running like a human. It was also entirely covered in thick white fur and would have been almost impossible to spot if it had not been covered in blood. Whether or not that was its blood or the driver of that car's, I never stuck around to find out. Whatever that thing was too distracted to see me and sprinted right past me down the middle of the road, still breathing as heavy as ever. After what I thought was a solid 10 minutes, I forced myself out of the snowbank and sprinted back to my car. When I got back to my car, all 4 of my doors were wide open and the pizza boxes were strewn all over the road. Not even thinking about the pizza or the delivery, I drove straight to the police station and reported whatever had happened. Officially, the police report states that the driver of the car collided with a large bear and that the bear dragged him off into the woods and devoured him. They never found his body, but did find what appeared to be a portion of his spine almost 80 kilometres away from where the accident site was. It was a really big thing in our town. People spent weeks searching for him. Apparently, he was the distant second cousin of the elderly lady I was supposed to deliver to. That part didn't surprise me. Most of the redneck folk out that way are partially related to each other. But what really messed me up about all this is that the police and conservation officers killed almost every bear in a 50-kilometre radius and examined the contents of their stomach. None of the bears killed had any human flesh in their guts, and the report states that the only thing big enough to cause an accident of that calibre is a large bear. Whatever that thing was the driver hit, it's still out there, and I hopefully never see it again. I seriously need help and am terrified out of my mind. So I'll start off by saying I've never believed in anything paranormal. I'm a pretty science-based dude. I always look for a logical explanation, and I still am for this encounter. So if anyone has any ideas, let me know. I don't have much time for leisure with work recently, being having to accept some pretty awful shifts to get by with COVID times. So I've lost my ability to go out on my evening walks, which are a method of stress relief for me. So 3 nights ago, I decided to just go for a late night walk. I put on my headband flashlight and decided to take a path I hadn't in ages. There's a small trail near the back of my neighbourhood that goes about 4 miles deep into the woods. My plan was to walk about 1.5 miles in and take the parallel path to come back. I make it down to around 1.3 miles, according to my Fitbit, and I start getting that feeling I'm being watched. I turn off my headlight and sit still to listen. At this point, I'm more concerned there's a guy following me who is up to no good. I heard clear footsteps in the leaves off the trail, and they've been behind me for nearly 5 minutes. I stopped, thinking it was an animal or another walker, and became worried. Sitting there for about probably 3 to 4 minutes, and I hear nothing at all. I turn back on my headlight and decide to start walking back home. About 2 minutes later, I hear footsteps again. This time, it sounds different. It sounds like 4 feet instead of 2, and it's walking at the same increased speed that I am. I turn around quickly with my headlight and my phone light and point it behind me. Silence. I get angry and yell out, "Leave me alone! I'm going to call the cops! And if you come at me, I have a knife!" Silence. I yell again to get the fuck out of here and start walking towards where I heard the walking. Roughly 20 yards out, I see what looks like a literal naked man running full speed on all fours into the woods. Normally, I chalk that up to drugs, but my area does not have a drug problem, and there were some details that lead me to believe it wasn't a person. For one, they were damn near hairless, completely bald, pale white skin, and the way it ran on all fours looked natural. Not like when you try to run on all fours and look stupid. It looked like its bone structure was designed to walk on all fours. There was no hunched look, their back was flat, and they were really fast. Last thing that happened was straight out of a horror movie. I hadn't heard anything in a while on my way back, but kept turning around to be sure. With about 3 miles left to go until I was in the clear, I hear a mad dash through the leaves. I whip around and it stops on a dime. I see the edges of its head behind a tree and yell loudly to try and intimidate. What I heard next, I'll never forget in my entire life. It cackled like a monkey, a noise I've literally only heard in nature documentaries. The tone was that of a mockery, a predator having fun with me. I didn't stick around. I sprinted as fast as I possibly could back home. I'd love to believe this was some prank or some rabid, ball-diseased coyote, but I got a pretty clear look at it. It wasn't. It had human feet and human hands, a human head and a human buttocks, but nothing else about it was human. I called the cops after and told them a man was following me. I didn't want to say some creature because they'd think I'm crazy. They didn't find anything, but they did see quite a bit of activity in the leaves and dirt about 50 feet from where the trail was, leading far back into the woods before it got to a large stretch of grass where no footprints were seen. So after some internal debate, I decided I was going to go back because it would eat me up not knowing what this thing was. When I first saw it, I had zero idea what it could be. I figured some drugged out or mentally ill man, a prankster or sickly deformed animal. After letting it all settle though, there's just no way any of that was the case. I was trying to justify it in my mind because I've always been a heavy skeptic of anything paranormal. And to be fair, I still am. But I'm warming up to the idea that crawlers may actually exist. So I messaged 3 of my buddies, told them everything that happened in detail over text, and asked them if they'd come look with me. Them, being non-believers like me, and also just loving adventure and spooky stuff, were more than excited to go. 2 of the friends have guns, and so do I. So we all brought them. Just to be clear, 1 friend had a pistol, and 1 had a shotgun. I also had a pistol. Now, the other friend was in charge of holding the 2 flashlights to give us some light. 1 being a phone flashlight, so he would be ready to take a picture at a moment's notice. We waited until 9:30 p.m, when it was completely dark, and headed down the same trail I did last time. My heart was pumping out of my chest, but I felt more confident having friends there. They were joking around and thought this was cool, and I tried joking back a few times, but the reality was I was pretty nervous. We walked the full 1.5 miles I had planned on walking last time and didn't encounter a thing. We had prepped for so long though and didn't want to give up quite yet, so we kept walking. About 5 or 8 minutes later, at close to the 2-mile mark, we started hearing some noises way back in the woods. It wasn't close, but it was loud enough for us to take notice. I told my friend to turn off the flashlight for a second and we listened. Bipedal footsteps made their way closer to us. Still far, but definitely coming our way. It sounded like they were wearing boots or something because of the heaviness of the steps were quite loud. That, or there were a lot of leaves, which, to be fair, is a possibility. It was off the trail, so it's all woods back there. Once the footsteps made it about 20 to 30 yards away, I called out asking if someone was here. The footsteps stopped, but only for a brief second. A second later, the bipedal footsteps turned into what sounded like something sprinting on all fours in our direction. My friend immediately turned on the flashlights, but there was nothing visible through the dense forest. At the beginning of the trail, the forest is pretty clear, but further back, it gets a lot more dense, so it was hard to tell. Once he turned on the light, the footsteps stopped as well. None of my friends were talking. Paranormal believer or not, hearing that will scare the shit out of you. My friend unholstered his pistol and kept it by his side. He looked at me, and I could see he wasn't having a good time anymore. My friend holding the camera was visibly shaky and was darting his glance between all of us. The third friend shortly after yelled into the woods, "I see you! Come out! Stop fucking with us! We have guns and we'll shoot! I don't want to hurt you over some dumb joke. Now come on!" We hear that sound again. The one that sounded like a cackle. Only this time, it was more of a yell or shriek, aggravated noise. I don't even know what to compare it to. I just know it gave me goosebumps. My friend immediately shot his gun into the woods, causing my ears to ring horribly due to me being right next to him. I couldn't hear for shit, but I noticed his gaze went from the spot we heard the footsteps, from over to the right of the spot, about 90 degrees. I followed his gaze for about half a second, caught a glimpse of once again a tall human-like thing running on all fours behind a tree. He started walking towards that direction, but my friend with the flashlight stopped him. He made the point that it was a buckshot. The chances he missed were slim due to the fact that the tree it was next to was covered in evidence that the shot was on target. My friend made a scary point that we hadn't considered. What if it hit it, but didn't hurt it? What if he was right? What if it took a shotgun hit and it didn't even fall over? My estimate is that it was between 6 foot and 6'4", and maybe between 140 to 165 pounds. So if it could still run after that shot, it either didn't get hit, or it's not something we want to mess with. We hear the cackle I heard the first time, that mocking noise. Not so much an aggravated noise this time, more so a noise that it gave me the impression it was having fun, or enjoying the fear we blatantly had in our voices. No more footsteps, but my friend shot in its general direction again, ears ringing again. I couldn't see anything, but I did see a small glimpse again of it running off deeper into the woods. Could only see its rear for a second or two before it was too far to be seen by the light. This meant it had to be running pretty fast. I don't want to give a number, but if I had to guess, it was easily around 20 miles per hour or so. Nothing a human could do on all fours, that's for damn sure. We turned around and jogged back home. Upon getting home, we talked about what we saw. Nobody was disputing my story now. We had all seen it. We talked all night. I showed them some of my comments on my last post where they suggested a crawler. We read a lot of posts and some of them matched our experience and some didn't. But we did all agree that if this was paranormal, that a crawler was the best guess we had. Now we are all on the same page. We still don't know if we buy into the paranormal claims, but this one is starting to convince us. We realised at the end we hadn't even looked for pictures. We asked my friend who had the phone, and he shyly admitted he hadn't even thought to take a single picture. I'm not gonna lie, guys, I was so terrified. I didn't even open the camera app a single time. I was just trying to make sure it wasn't behind us or charging us. I'm sorry. We told him not to worry. None of us would have been any better about being calm enough to set up a picture. I never saw its face still, but the friend who took the shot swears it didn't have one, or at least had no eyes. He couldn't see if it had a mouth, but it was about a third out from behind the tree, and from his angle, he saw it was blank from the nose area up. Or, if it did have eyes, it was too black to be noticeable in the dark. We did all decide though, we're going to go back. We'll be more prepared this time. We'll do our research. We'll have a camera strapped to us. We're always recording. We know what to expect, so we'll be more calm. The encounter took place about 4 years ago. Since learning about humanoids, and in particular about the rake, I was always very fascinated about them. Back in the good old days, one of my best friends, Robert, would come over for sleepovers. I introduced him to the rake. We always watched horror movies or videos of bizarre encounters, as we loved to frighten ourselves before venturing out into the local woods. Now, I basically live a 2-minute walk away from the woods. Till that night trip, we never encountered anything really creepy when venturing out into the woods. Sometimes, Robert would try and stand still in silence in hope of hearing something exciting. For example, an animal walking over woods or sticks and creating sounds. In order for you to better understand my thoughts later on, I want to give you a detailed explanation of our path. It was after midnight when we headed out. Shortly after entering the forest, there was a small crossing with a left path and a right path. We took the right path, walking up a hill for about a quarter of an hour. After that, we just pretty much followed the path, reaching the peak of the hill, and then ventured down again for about 10 minutes. We reached another crossing. The left path would lead us to another exit, whereas the straight path would lead us to continue walking on to another hill. About half an hour going up the hill, I told Robert that I wanted to go home, as I was starting to get cold and exhausted. Furthermore, I told him that I did not see us witnessing anything exciting anymore for the night. Robert was disappointed, but nonetheless, he agreed. Robert wanted us to regularly stop on our way back and stop speaking so that we could be completely silent to see if we could hear anything around us. We also flashed our lights into the woods regularly. This is where it starts to get creepy. As we started to head down the second hill, we started to relax and talk about other interests. As my back then shrimp posture obliged me to, I more or less only looked down at my feet when walking. As we reached the second crosswalk again, Robert suddenly scurried up. In panic, he asked me whether I also saw something jump into the woods coming from the right path. As I'd already mentioned, I looked at my feet when walking down the path, meaning I couldn't have seen anything. However, I believed that Robert just wanted to build up suspense, as he liked to do that when nothing happened on our trips. So, I didn't really believe him in that. He started throwing rocks in the area where he said the figure seemed to head. We stood still for some minutes, listening for any suspicious sounds, but the forest was in total silence. Realizing this, it made me somewhat uncomfortable. On our way back from the second crossing, back to the first, we started to ease back down again and started talking normally. The walk back took us about half an hour. Now, again, it started to get creepy. As we were about to reach that first crossing, I used my flashlight on the trees that were not too far in front of us. As I pointed my light on them, I noticed that there were 2 yellow dots right beside a big tree. As we came closer, I could see it more clearly. These were not just 2 yellow dots. I started to recognize a bald head with these 2 yellow glowing eyes. I told Robert to stand still. I pointed him in the area that the thing was peeking from behind the tree. I was furious at him because he didn't see it. I told him that he needed to focus on the yellow dots. When he recognized it, he freaked out too. I freaked out even more when I thought about our situation. This creature stood between the only exit out of the forest and us. We really started to panic because we didn't know what to do. As Robert also started to flash on that creature with his flashlight, we both more or less shouted at ourselves. The creature went behind the tree and peeked out from the other side. As we followed with our lights, it stepped back from the tree. I was able to see more of its body. It was a white greyish colour, hunched over. Its arms were hanging down, and it slowly walked away from the crossing, moving one leg, then the other. We stood on this spot for a few seconds. Then I carefully started to peek in the area it vanished from. I couldn't see it anymore. I told Robert to run for his fucking life, and boy, oh boy, even Usain Bolt would have been astonished of our speed in that run. We ran through the exit and went back to my home. It was the scariest experience of my life. What I really find so intriguing about this encounter, this creature either followed or stalked us very quietly through the woods for about half an hour since Robert spotted it on the second crossing till the exit, or it was smart enough to recognise the path we took would be leading us to, as we first saw it at our second crossing, and then in front of us at the exit. It was able to recognise pretty fast that we'd spotted it too, I think by switching sides at the tree when peeking out, and it wanted to confirm for itself whether we'd spotted it by seeing us rotating the light to the other side of the tree. And last but not least, I do not think it was scared in the slightest of us. Even as I and Robert started to speak more loudly, in a stressed out voice, it only walked away calmly. If I had to guess, I'd say that this thing was about 2 meters tall. So after I did some research, it seems that some characteristics align with that fateful night of mine. It was winter when we went out, and it was a completely dark night. Now there is one thing that does not leave my mind. Not far away from the place we encountered the crawler is a dried up river. At one point or rather, at the seeming end of the river are multiple little dug-in cave entrances. I always believed that due to the small size, foxes have dug them, and since then reside there. I mean, it is a place that no person actually comes near, as it is difficult to traverse. However, after reading multiple stories, I cannot leave the idea out of my mind that a crawler could actually reside deep down in these caves. Not an expert on this, it's just food for thought. And now even though these cave entrances do look like a normal fox burrow, I've almost never seen one fox in my entire 21 years of living here. This event took place about 6 months ago. I love to stay up late and read stories and watch movies and so on. The typical night out you've surely read about before somewhere. That night, I already turned off the TV and browsed on my mobile phone, ready to go to bed. My window was tilted inwards to ventilate the room, when all of a sudden, I hear a loud, aggressive shrieking, or rather, clicking sound, coming right from under my window. I live on the second floor. It is really hard for me to describe that scream precisely, or find any similar references to it. I've never heard that sound before. I know how wild boars sound, but that surely was not one. Furthermore, I had to instantly reference that scream to the crawler I saw back before. What scares me the most is that this scream came from right under my window. It really seems to me that it did that on purpose, to make me aware of its presence, to challenge me. I was scared shitless and did not move a muscle for about 10 minutes. 5 minutes after that, I heard a few sounds coming from our carport, like someone stepping on uneven metal plate or metallic things being moved around. I didn't hear anything after that for the rest of the night, and my family did not remark anything to be missing afterwards. So, if we assume that this was the crawler from back then, why would it let us walk away then, without making any aggressive moves at all? And some years after it, it positions itself right under my window and makes itself to be known in an aggressive manner. I know it may sound like an exaggerated wild fantasy to you, but it really felt like that crawler wanted to remind me that it is still there and knows my location and me. It felt like it wanted to mock or dominate me. About a year ago, I moved my family and I to a home way out in the woods in Tennessee. I wanted to be brief here, but I need to get this off my chest. And after looking into this matter a little more, I have a lot more details that I think will paint a clear picture in the end, so please bear with me. The nights here can be extremely loud. Between the crickets, the tree frogs, and the cicadas, it can almost be deafening. One night, not too long ago, after we moved in, I'd forgotten something in my car, and I headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog wouldn't go outside with me. My dog goes everywhere with me, as I am her whole world, but not this night. As I held the door open, she looked out and then looked at me like, nope. So I walked out and shut the door behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was that there was not a peep. It was dead silent. Still shrugged this off and walked down my front steps and headed down to my car. When I'd gotten about 10 feet from my car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt as though something was watching me. I looked around but saw nothing. After I reached my car for what I had forgotten to grab earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving towards me. I took a step back and checked around me. All of a sudden, I heard one of my hedges next to me that lined the walkway to our front door rattle. At first, I thought it was a rabbit that I'd spooked, as I had seen one just earlier in the day right where this was. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a large rock, about the size of a cantaloupe, landing a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into a shrub. I drew my gun and called out and said, whoever this was is about to be shot. After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think that maybe this was some local teenagers messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned and started walking back to my front door. Almost as soon as I turned towards my house, I heard this deep, panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog, but what made me nope back to my front door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leapt up onto my porch, turned and drew my gun again, expecting something right there. But again, there was nothing. So a couple of weeks later, I was on my porch at night, sitting on a bench with my wife. She got up and walked inside to get something. And as soon as she shut the door, I heard that panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet this sounded like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere, and it was very loud. Again, I couldn't see anything, so I noped it back inside my house. Now, at this point, I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happened, I let it go. A month or so later, it was a really rainy and stormy night. This is around 9 p.m, and my wife and I enjoy listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing the rain is. Me, growing up in Oregon, loved the rain. And for the past 10 years, we lived in Vegas, where it would dump the entire year of rain in a day and then be bone dry for the rest of the year. For my wife, who grew up in Nevada, rain was such a rare thing, and she loved going outside and watching the rain. So for us, this is an enjoyable experience. Except this night in particular, things took a weird turn. As we were sitting there talking about the rain and relaxing, my wife stops me and said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "No. What did you hear?" She said, "I swear it sounded like a small child calling for help out in the woods beside our house." I said, "No, I didn't hear anything." After a few moments of listening intently, she said, "There it is again." I said to her that I didn't hear a thing and asked her if she was sure she wasn't just hearing things. She looked at me offended that I didn't hear anything and said, "No, I am positive. How could you not hear that? It was our son. I think he's out there and got lost." I said, "No, he's in the house sleeping on the couch." We then both looked through the blinds that were open right behind us, and we could see all of our children laying there. She said, "That's so weird. I swear it sounds like our son." I said, "Well, it isn't him. He's right there. Besides, I don't hear anything." And then she stands up and says, "Wow, he's really crying out for help. I need to go look for him." Now at this point, if you knew my wife, you would know she's absolutely creeped out by the woods and wouldn't be caught dead walking into them during the daylight, much less at night during a storm. I grabbed her hand and said, "I've been listening intently. There is absolutely nobody calling out for help. You need to stay here." At this point, I'm getting worried about her. She was acting completely out of character. Not to mention that at the time, she's 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. She then says, "What if there is some child out there lost in the woods?" I told her, well, first off, I would be able to hear them too. Secondly, there are no other kids around here for miles, and the odds of them being lost 100 feet from our house that's lit up like a Christmas tree is nil. She then says, "I know, but what if it's a kid?" Before I could say anything else, she stands up and starts walking toward the stairs. I jumped up and grabbed her hand again and said, "No, you're not. Get in the house. I don't know what's going on, but you need to go inside." She then complies, and we both go inside. I don't know what this was, but it freaked me out. A few months after this, just as it was getting dark outside, I heard the front door to our house open, and I got up to investigate. We have autistic 6-year-old twins, and we have the door set up so that they can't open it without us there. So to hear this sound, it could only be my wife. What was weird was the fact that she usually doesn't go outside without saying something to me. I walked out front and saw my wife walking down our private road towards the drive on the side of our house. I asked her what she's doing, and she says she was sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying out in the woods. I said, "Seriously, and you just decided to walk off into the woods to investigate?" She then looks out at the woods and says, "See, there it is again." And again, I can't hear anything, but what I did notice is that it was completely silent outside again. I told her, just like before, the chances of a baby being out in the woods outside our house is slim, and that she needed to get back in the house. She said, "What if someone left a baby out there?" I said to her, well, if that were true, I would also hear it. Now at this point, I was really starting to worry about my wife's mental health. I actually asked her to see a psychiatrist, and she did. Now looking back, I feel really bad about this, knowing what I know. A key to this moment was that my wife had just given birth to a baby girl a month before. A few days after this, we were out on the front porch. It's early evening, and I had just mowed the lawn this day. Our 3-year-old son was riding around on his little car in front of the house. Now, he knows that he's not allowed outside of a certain area that we mapped off. He loves playing outside, but with the road behind 50 feet from our front porch, we have to be careful, as a lot of boaters will fly through after drinking all day on their boats. As we are talking, we are both keeping an eye on him. A neighbour drives by and stops to say hi for a second. This interaction took approximately 8 seconds, as all they said were, "How are things?" We said good, and he told us he would stop by later as his wife got something for the kids, who happens to be one of their teachers in school. And we said, "Okay, great," and he drove off. I looked over where our son was, and he was gone. I called out his name and ran over to the side of the house, and I could hear his car on our side drive. I scolded him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish and pointed to the woods behind our house. I told him he had 5 seconds to get back up to the front of the house, or else. And he adamantly pointed back in the direction of the woods and kept trying to tell me something. I looked off in the direction of the woods and just assumed he saw a deer or squirrel or something and wanted to see it up close. I walked him back up to the front of the house, and he cried the whole way there. He got really upset that I wouldn't let him go into the woods, but I just wrote this off as him being curious, and most 3-year-old boys are. Now this instance isn't isolated, as our twins have done similar things, but nothing quite as extreme as this one. There have been nights where we had just laid down for the night and heard a loud bang on the side of our house on the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped up and looked out the window. Our floodlight had come on, but I could see nothing. Now, the weird part about this is that our bedroom sits about 12 feet from the ground level, as we have a full-size basement that's cinder block. I put on my slippers and grabbed one of my 12-gauge shotguns and walked outside to investigate. It was dead silent again. The floodlight that's on the side of the house had clicked off at this point, so I walked over to the end of the deck and shined my light around the yard. There was nothing. I walked around the house and shined the light around intently. As I approached the back side of my house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like someone was watching me. I shined my light up in the trees, but again, nothing. I rounded the corner, and the first thing I noticed was that my 3 dogs that were in their area weren't making a peep. Now, our dogs have no filter and will bark at anyone and everyone. This includes me. So to see them all hiding with their tails between their legs, not making a peep, really had me worried. As I kept walking, all of a sudden the crickets and frogs started making sounds again. It was as if someone had flicked a switch. I walked back into the house and told my wife that I hadn't seen anything. She shrugged it off, said okay, as long as our dogs were okay. Due to the circumstances that night, I decided to let the dogs in and sleep with us. This very same thing has happened on all 4 exterior walls of our house. It's random and annoying. But just like this instance, every time there is nothing going on outside. There have also been times where we were sitting in the house and I was watching a movie. My wife walked over to me and said, "Did you call me?" I said no, and she swears she heard me call a name in her ear. She said that it was definitely my voice, but she didn't understand because it sounded so close, and I was a good 20 feet away from her in my recliner. The important part to this was that she was sitting at the table doing something, and the slider to the backyard was open behind her. Now, our back patio sits about 20 feet off the ground and is like a balcony as it has no stair access outside. I think the previous owner built it for a barbecuing. There have been several instances where she would say she heard someone whisper in her ear, but she couldn't make out the sound. Again, I kept thinking she was going crazy, but as you will see, I think all of this is tied into this final moment where things are revealed. The last thing I want to mention before we get into what just happened is that I have a shooting range built behind my workshop on an opposite side of our property next to the main road. It is kind of on a down slope, but it works perfectly for what I need. The range itself is cut straight into the woods, going down about 100 yards or so. When you're at the down range, you have woods surrounding you on all sides, except back up to my shop. I have to say, it has always felt creepy when I am dealing with my targets or mowing. When you are down there, it feels like you're miles from anyone. One day, around 5 in the evening, I was sighting in a new rifle scope. The sun was still up, but was going to start to fade soon. So, I knew this was going to be the final test. Up until this point, nothing really happened while I was making my multiple trips downrange, other than this feeling of uneasiness. As I got downrange, I kept getting this feeling like someone or something was watching me. I looked around but didn't see anything. As I was placing stickers over my previous shots, I heard something big off to the side of me. It sounded like a large branch had snapped off a tree. Now, if you've been in Tennessee woods, you will know that a lot of branches fall off trees randomly out of nowhere. So this is nothing new, except this time it was very loud and sounded like fresh, strong wood, if that makes any sense. I turned and looked, but again, I couldn't see anything. I started walking back up to my rifle and I swear I heard someone right behind me. I turned around, but again saw nothing. As I started to walk again, I heard this deep growl. It was really deep and loud, and what's worse is that it was all around me. I turned around facing the range and started walking backwards. The thought of some rabid dog charging out of the bushes had me freaked out. So running wasn't a good idea. I slowly walked backwards up the hill to my rifle, but nothing happened. I grabbed my rifle and sprayed the target with rapid fire, hoping to scare off whatever was stalking me. I left 10 rounds in the mag and grabbed my rifle bag, quickly walking back up to the house. I never told my wife about this, as I didn't want her to freak out. Fast forward about a year later from when we moved in, and my niece is staying with us as a live-in nanny to earn money over summer break from college. We were on our way back from the store and about a mile from our house, and I saw 2 eyes reflecting in the headlights coming from a wide tree on the side of the road just ahead. It had caught my attention because they were higher than a deer, but a different colour and size. Just as I had said, "What is that?" and squinted, they vanished. I had made a comment that it was almost as if it had known I could see its eyes and moved. The colour was kind of a golden green, but they resembled the mannerism of a large cat, as they felt ominous. It's hard to explain, but I shrugged it off as we were passing the tree and saw nothing. A few moments later, we arrived at the house. As we were getting bags out of the car, my 3-year-old son came bolting out of the house, excited to see me. As I was waiting to help her carry in her bags, I heard my dog growl. I looked in the direction she was looking at. It was my neighbour's property across the street. Now, what I saw has kept me up all night. Up until this point, I've always been sceptical, as I have never seen anything with my own 2 eyes. Even with what had happened to me the year prior, I still had my doubts that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. My neighbour's house sits adjacent to my house on about an acre lot. Directly in front of my house is a wall of woods, and directly behind my house is several thousand acres of untouched forest. As I was looking across the street to my neighbour's property, I saw a large dark figure between the trees at first. The movement caught me off guard, as it looked like something big, moving quickly on all fours. Then, when it came out into clear view, it stood up and walked like a man. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. It was very tall, but what was strange about it was the distance it was covering, and the fact that when it was in front of his shed, I swear I could see through it. It was clearly walking quickly, but moving faster than any person could at a sprint. More importantly, there was no sound. It was like it was phasing in and out of reality as it moved. I said, "What the hell is that?" and realised that it was looking directly at us. It had moved at an angle away from us to minimise its time out in the open and moving as quickly as it could while still being silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realised that whatever it was stalking us. I told my niece to get in the house now, and I grabbed my son and booked it inside. I grabbed my AR-15 with a short scope and came back outside to see my niece still grabbing stuff out of her car. Knowing I told her firmly and clearly to get in the house, her disregard to my command annoyed me. But still, I watched over her without saying a word. As she was slowly walking, she turned towards the woods across the street from my house. Then she suddenly bolted for the house. She ran up the steps in a panicked state. I asked her what she saw, and her face was pale as a ghost. She said, "I heard something big in the woods walking loudly on the leaves, and when I turned toward it, I heard a deep, guttural growl." I asked her why she didn't come when I told her, and she said she thought that I was talking to my son. I told her what I had seen, and she wanted to get a closer look to see if she could see something. I told her that it wasn't a good idea, and she went anyway. As she was walking down the walkway, I heard the sound of dry leaves crunching in the woods across the street. I told her to stop and come take the flashlight. Now at this point, she's about 6 feet away from my wife's SUV. As she turned and started walking back to me, I caught a glimpse of something grey and hairy bolt from behind the SUV back across the street and into the woods. My porch is a raised porch, and our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall. And whatever this was, it cleared about 45 feet in what looked like a single jump. It moved like lightning. Whatever it was, it wanted my niece. It jumped behind the car, out of my line of sight, and was waiting for her. She still doubted my warnings and grabbed the flashlight and walked back towards the car. As she entered my driveway, she stopped dead in her tracks, leaned forward as if she could see something. I asked her what she saw. She turned and ran back up onto the porch with a terrified look on her face, saying, "Nope, nope, nope," over and over again. She said it was a figure hiding inside of a tree, that she saw its eyes. I asked her what they looked like, and all she could say was that they looked dull red at first, but as she got closer, they looked dead. I said, "What do you mean dead?" And she said that the pupils looked grey, like the way eyes look when people go blind. She said it was really dark grey, and she swears she could see through it, almost like a dark cloud. She wanted to go out again and took a step down the stairs, and as she did, it revealed itself from the tree. I said, "Get inside." I went in and locked the door. It looked like a tall, human-shaped being. It was really tall and looked ominous as hell. The next morning, we did a height comparison to the tree limb she saw it stand over, and it put its height to around 9 feet tall, and its eyes were about 6 inches apart. At this point, I don't know what this thing was. After doing some research, I think that this thing was a glimmer man or even a crawler. I looked to see if there had been any other sightings in Benton County, but nothing. More importantly, I swear it would phase in and out, almost like a shadow person, but bigger, and more obvious. I believe that this thing can communicate telepathically. This explains why everyone was hearing something that nobody else could hear. Secondly, I think it has a playback-like communication, like a mimic. So when I heard my dog panting, it was probably one of my dogs it had heard. My wife was actually hearing our son crying for help, as he'd recently fell and cried for help. The baby crying would be our newborn baby, who she had just given birth to recently, and it must have heard me call my wife's name and kept telepathically calling my wife's name with my voice. Another thing that my niece had said that night was that she felt compelled to go back outside to it. She said it felt like this thing was communicating with her somehow, and it wanted her to go back outside. The more I read about this thing, the more everything that has been happening over the past year makes sense. One thing that I find extra convincing is that down the road towards the lake, there is a property that is barbed wired off and is a wall of forest with no driveway. A lot of the property down our road is underdeveloped owned land, and on one of the trees there is this large old sign that says "Screamer lives here," with an arrow pointing back into the woods. Now, I have to admit, when I first saw this sign, I laughed, thinking maybe the owner screamed at trespassers who entered his property. When I did a satellite search of our neighbourhood, that entire section of road has no houses or trails or anything, and it's just pure forest for as far as the eye can see. One of the things that this thing is said to do is make a loud scream. As I was sitting on my porch one night, I did catch some strange sounds on camera, as well as when I passed an area with my flashlight. There appeared to be something, but when I came back to it, there was nothing. Again, due to the lighting, it's very hard to make out. I haven't felt comfortable going out since my niece just came back from a week's vacation in Florida, so we plan to sit out there a couple of nights and try and see if we can catch anything. This stuff has been happening for a while now, but it was random and far apart. Ever since the last incident, I have seen things that I can't explain, but they seem to be happening almost on a daily basis now. Last night, when my niece arrived, we went out onto the front porch to welcome her. I did notice something that looked like a face staring at me, but what was weird was that as I was staring at it, it moved back into the shadow without moving, if that makes any sense. The one thing that I would like to add in this update that I hadn't thought was connected was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. My wife and I had been in an argument about something silly. She decided to walk back into our woods to clear her head. I was on the back patio when I noticed her walking down our shooting range. I asked her where she was going and she said to cool off. Now, I know the chances of something happening to her were slim, but I found it odd that she would choose to go into the woods rather than simply walking down the road. I quickly got dressed and went down to try and bring her back. I went to the end of the range and called out her name. After a few minutes of calling out, I heard nothing. Not a peep, or a twig, or anything. Now, the weird part is that it is impossible to move around these woods without making any sound, especially for her. I was worried that she was walking too far, but I had to get back into the house as our children were alone. It freaked me out because it was as if she had vanished. I went back in the house and debated calling someone, but figured I would give her a little more time. I went to the back patio and waited. After about an hour, I started to get really worried. I called out her name again and decided that I would call if she hadn't returned at an 1.5 hour mark. Another 20 minutes went by. She came walking back out of the woods, angry that she had worried me so much, yet also relieved. I asked her what was she thinking. She said, "What?" As she came back into the house, she came in and looked at me like I was crazy. I said, "Did you not hear me calling out to you?" She said she only heard me once, and she replied. Now this is where it gets crazier. She said, "I've only been gone for 10 to 15 minutes. Why are you freaking out?" When I told her that she'd been gone for 1 hour and 20 minutes, she didn't believe me. She also said that when she went down there, she didn't go very far. But when she turned around, she started walking and got worried that she was lost. She said she didn't recognize where she was, but something told her to keep walking. She said it felt strange and that the air felt different. When she came back out of the woods, she was relieved to see the house. Now, the part that upsets me the most about this was that where she said she was is impossible. I was literally standing 20 to 30 feet away from that spot. If she'd been there, not only would I have seen her, but she could have talked to me in a normal voice. More concerning is that you can see the house from this spot, and how she felt lost is mind-boggling. I don't know what this was. I thought that again she was just losing her mind. After reading responses, I feel that what happened to her was real. I plan to go back where she was with her to prove that you can see the house from there, but I want her to show me exactly where she went, as well as talk me through everything. I know some people have to be thinking that we are crazy, but I promise that I will do whatever it takes to get proof. I'd just like to add to this, after speaking to my niece about her encounter, she said that she felt compelled to go out even though she knew it was wrong. She said it felt like it was saying, "Come out here and see what I am." But also, in the back of her mind, she knew it was crazy and dangerous. I actually had to tell her a few times that I wasn't allowing her outside. I agree this is the last straw, and we need a security system, along with trail cameras on the outer perimeter. I also would like to swap out my floodlights with ring camera floodlights. I've been told these things avoid cameras, so maybe if I get enough of them, I guess we will see. It feels good getting this off my chest. The few people I tried bringing this stuff up to have literally looked at me like I have lost my mind. I have to admit, after seeing what I saw, I began to question everything.
The 24th of June, 2022. Weird things keep happening. Today, my 3-year-old son is playing on the back patio, a few feet away from us, and all of a sudden, the dogs inside jump and start barking, as one of our dogs, Duke, is on the patio with him, comes bolting into the door. I jump up to see what's going on, and my son is pointing at the tree line saying, "Werewolf, Daddy, werewolf." Now, my son loves watching videos of werewolves for toddlers for some reason. I would normally put this off as nothing, but if you saw the look in his face, you would know that he was serious. Plus, with the way my dogs reacted, he had to have seen something. I pulled out my phone and began recording. He kept saying, "Daddy, look, werewolf in the bushes." I tell him I can't see anything, but I can hear something really big in the leaves. Okay, I meant to keep everyone updated. Up until now, I have just got a lot on my plate. My niece has quit. She said she can't handle all the stuff that has been happening to her. Everything was fine for a while. We kept indoors for the most part. We went out on the porch one night with a flashlight and camera, hoping to catch something. We kept hearing things in the brush, which could be anything. After a while of not seeing anything, we went back inside. I said my prayers, then slept like a baby. My niece, however, did not. She woke up late the next day and seemed a bit jumpy. I asked her what was wrong. She said that she didn't sleep well, as something was outside her window. It took a bit of prodding to get her to talk about it. She said she could hear something big outside her window, but every time she looked, she couldn't see anything. She told me she heard weird noises that she couldn't describe. She came out in the living room to see if I was still up, but I was fast asleep. She decided to go back to her room and go to sleep watching YouTube on her phone. She said she was almost asleep when she felt something standing right behind her. She turned around and there was nothing. She said she kept having that feeling but brushed it off as her imagination. That was up until about 3 a.m. when she woke up. She said she had her phone in the windowsill playing a video. She had the same feeling as before, but this time it was very intense. Like whatever it was, it wanted to devour her. She turned around quickly and saw what looked like a shadow disappear into the wall in the blink of an eye. She told me this kept happening until she passed out late in the morning. I told her that was weird, as we had never experienced anything like that in the house before. We have had weird things happen, like things disappear for a while, then reappear days or months later in the exact spot they were last. She said it felt like whatever this was It made her feel like it wanted to hurt her. I told her to keep me updated and let me know if anything else happens. A few days later, she asks if she can use the hot tub that's out back. I explained to her that it's off as we can't afford to heat it. When we get over to it, I open to look inside. To my disbelief, not only is it on, but the water looks great, minus a little cleanup that needed to be done. As I'm walking around, all of a sudden, I hear this really loud thump behind me, like a log falling onto the ground, or a really big boulder hitting the ground. Imagine an engine block falling 20 feet onto soft soil. It made me jump. I turned around, but couldn't see anything, as the brush was way too thick. I keep helping her work on the spa. Then she says she's going to go inside and get changed so she can get in. I look around and realize that it's getting dark outside, and I really don't want to be out here. I bend over to work on getting the filter cleaned out, and I hear what sounds like something big snapping branches and charging at me. It made me jump, then run back into the house. I turned around to see what it was, and nothing. I walk back into the house and walk upstairs. I tell her I heard something out there, and she looked at me for a minute, then said, "Well, I want to get in and relax." She asks if I can leave the back patio door open, so if she needs me, she can call. But according to her, she enjoyed the spa without incident. Every day, I notice her getting more anxious and less willing to talk about it. She says every night something new happens to her, but when I ask her to elaborate, she refused. A few nights later, I walk out on the porch and notice it's dead quiet again. I ask her to come out on the porch with me, but she says she's tired and wants to call a boyfriend and go to bed. My wife gets up early and takes care of the kids, and it's my job to handle night shift, so she's in bed at this point. I decide that I don't have the guts to do this alone, so I put on a movie and relax in my recliner. I end up falling asleep, then wake up at 3 a.m. to a noise coming from my niece's room. It sounds like a deep voice, and I knock on the door. I call out several times but get nothing in response. I figure it must be her video and decide to let it be. I head to bed, and just as I start to pass out, another loud bang happens. I wake up and hear what sounds like something skittering on the wall outside of my bedroom. Understand that this is way up in the air and physically impossible. I look out the window, but don't see anything. After going out and checking on this bang multiple times over the last year and seeing nothing, I decide to forget it and go back to sleep. The next day, my niece comes out and tells me that she had the shadow thing happen again, except this time, she left her light on. She said she woke up to getting that feeling again. She said that when she opened her eyes, she could see an extremely tall, shadowy figure standing over the top of her. She said it was moving closer to her, and just as she started to see the details of its face, she turned around in panic, but nothing was there. She said the eyes haunted her, but didn't want to elaborate any further. The next morning, for the first time ever, my niece is up bright and early. I noticed she looked anxious as she told me, and she is headed home for the 4th of July weekend and will be back on Tuesday. I asked her if she was okay, and she told me yeah, and quickly walked out the door. Later that day, I get a call from my sister telling me that she won't be coming back. I ask her if everything is all right. She says yes, that she just wants to enjoy the rest of her summer. A little while later, I get a call from my niece telling me that she doesn't want to work here anymore, as she can't handle the anxiety from whatever is out there. She didn't elaborate more than that, but whatever has been going on in her room has her petrified. I checked on her room and noticed that she has been sleeping with one of the windows wide open. This window is perfectly accessible from the outside. I don't know what's been going on to her, but whatever it is, it looks like it could have been coming into the room. Now fast forward to the 4th of July. I do fireworks out front of our property by the road facing the woods. Due to what's been happening at night, I decided to do them prior to it getting dark outside. We do our fireworks, and just as it starts getting dark, I get everyone inside. After a couple of hours, I remember that my hose is still on the ground and laying out by the road. I head out to clean everything up and put the hose away. While I'm doing this, I notice it's dead silent again, minus the distant sound of fireworks. The hairs on the back of my neck go up, and I get the feeling that I am being watched again. I hurry and coil the hose and ran back into the house. I swear I'm starting to wonder if it's just my mind playing tricks on me at this point.
So to begin, this story happened back in 2018. I arrived in this small rural town near Cape May. The company I was working for at the time was sending me out to go door to door, advertising cable and Wi-Fi that they wanted me to sell. I was getting weird vibes all throughout the day, as the town itself was very small and a bit creepy, with people staring at me or giving me the cold shoulder for the entire day. It seemed like a lot of the townsfolk that I encountered that day were on edge, and it was a weird, tense atmosphere that I shrugged off, as people are weird all the time. I continued doing my job, chugging a Red Bull to keep me going, which didn't affect me at all, surprisingly. Besides the weird atmosphere, the scenery was actually quite pretty once you got off the main road. I had to stop at different streets and somewhere in the woods on long and seemingly beautiful endless roads. It was quite scenic. Just before sunset, I was scheduled to visit a few houses on a small peninsula. To get to this peninsula, you had to go down a very long road, past a summer camp area, past a trailer park, past the woods, and then you finally find yourself in a small open area with a big marsh, a couple small expensive houses, and shore access. The houses were so close to the water it seemed to be a code violation. But I'm sure they were built to withstand storms since they looked so expensive. Every house had its own theme, and the area was mostly deserted. Only one house had someone inside, whom I had talked to after knocking on his door. I was so distracted looking at the houses and scenery that I didn't notice how fast sunset was approaching. I came to the realization that I should start heading back to avoid being alone on that long deserted pathway in the woods. As a smaller female, I'm never comfortable after dark in isolated places, especially without cell service. I was making my way down the path, so far so good, as it wasn't completely dark yet. As I approached the wooded area of the road, I was walking a bit faster, since there were no street lights, and the sunlight was rapidly disappearing. As I walked at a decently fast pace, I noticed something. The woods were eerily quiet. All the life that I was hearing before was gone. No crickets, no birds, just pure silence. I stopped in my tracks and got chills down my spine as I felt that feeling I was being watched. I looked around the dark woods for any sudden movements, and then, like clockwork, something up ahead made its way out of the tree line. It looked to be some type of large animal. My brain went into overdrive analysing whatever this animal was. Bear? A dog? No, it looked like a large dog, but dogs don't get this big. Though I was intimidated by its large size. It hadn't noticed me. Even though I was scared, I also didn't want to walk back and go into that one man's house. As a woman, I would rather take my chances with a wild animal than be alone with a man I don't know in a deserted holiday neighbourhood. The large animal in the distance had finally noticed my presence, observing me, not entirely sure of what to do with me. There wasn't enough light anymore for me to see the animal's face, but I felt unusually frightened. Whatever I was looking at was definitely too big to be a black bear, with a shoulder height of at least 5 feet on all fours, which is comparable in size to a brown bear. The mass on this creature was extensive, as the outline of what I could see looked like a wolf on steroids. It was very muscular. I also noticed that the outline of its face was very similar to that of a German shepherd or a wolf. It had perked ears and a long snout. In the heat of the moment, I could only hear the sound of my heart palpitating as fear and adrenaline started to crawl its way into my bloodstream. It felt as if time stood still, and then it dawned on me. What I was looking at wasn't a normal animal. and it was simply too big to be any animal that I could recognize. And if it wanted to attack me, I would be powerless against it. It was simply too big. To calm myself down, I threw the idea that this creature was out of the ordinary out because I felt like this could be rationalized somehow. I made my brain go back to the idea of this being maybe a large dog or coyote. I also did not believe in cryptids and was completely unaware of what size coyotes are supposed to be. So I made a quick decision, realizing that this could very well be a life or death situation. I came to the conclusion that this very large dog-like creature was probably a skittish coyote that I could scare off, at least temporarily, to calm down my nerves. What other choice did I have? The longer I kept standing there, the more aggressive I might come across to this animal. And I didn't want it to get territorial or get the idea that I was easy prey. So I decided I would make the most hideous, loud, confusing and startling scream or howl I could muster and just sprint the rest of the way. After I screeched this hideous sound out of my body as hard as I could, the animal quickly changed its body language to defensive. But then it quickly changed its mind to deciding I wasn't worth a fight, as it ran a decent distance into the woods. Not too far though. I decided to sprint as fast as I could past that area and beyond. I sprinted until I reached the end of the road, and I noticed there was a summer camp area with streetlights near me. I rested on top of a table there, out of breath and feeling my heart pound out of my chest. However, I was still very shaken up and still felt like I was being watched. I kept my eyes on the tree line. My eyes were darting around looking for any sign this animal was still there. Once I felt the coast was clear, I located the next house I was scheduled to visit, and I quickly made my way over. I met a nice family who ended up buying cable from me and told them what happened to me that night and how I was treated by the locals. The lady of the family, who I presume to be the mother, said, "I don't know why they sent you out here alone. These woods are dangerous after dark, and there are creepy people who live around here." The impression she was giving me was that there were animal encounters she couldn't explain, and that there were lots of ex-convicts in the area, and people who should have been arrested, but haven't been. She was equally concerned about the people as she was about the animals around this place. This gave me goosebumps. How many times today could my life have been taken? They were extremely concerned for my safety and told me to contact my team leader so I could get picked up. They said they didn't want me to go outside again and that I should call it quits for the night and not make it to any other houses. Till this day, I still have no idea what creature I had encountered. There are strange things in the woods, things people don't speak about or cover up. I felt like the townsfolk of that town knew something about what I encountered.